By the way, I just have to say, I'm kind of in love with this thing right here. I am really curious to see how well it's going to handle my bastardized American English. Apparently pretty well. All right, just out of curiosity, how many people in this room identify as developer? Show of hands. Oh boy. How many people in this room identify as manager? Show of hands. Okay, so the developers are from Greece and the managers are from everywhere else. Is that how that works? All right. So it's fair to say, I think, that managers and developers don't always get along. Yeah? Is that, there's one woman down here, yes, I would kill my manager if I knew he was here right now. Right? I mean, it's frustrating because so much of the time, managers just seem so completely out of touch. And by the way, if you're a manager, you get really frustrated because developers, what a bunch of prima donnas. Right? I mean, seriously, that's bottled water. That's not sparkling water. I can't work today. Right? Yeesh. There's been a long history of contentiousness between developers and managers. And it's really fascinating because in many cases, the managers of the teams actually came from the ranks of developer. And so you'd think there would be a little bit more of a, happy, harmonic relationship, but it really doesn't happen. Developers chafe at the things that managers require of them, and managers get frustrated because the developers just resist in various ways. I mean, passive aggressiveness, thy name is developer. If we want to get to a point where our projects, where our work environment, where everything feels like it's in a sense of harmony, we're going to have to figure out how to get along. Because here is an interesting little factoid for you. I don't know if you knew this. You will spend as much time with your coworkers, aka your manager, as you do your spouse. Think about that for a second. You are spending as much time with your coworkers as you do your spouse. So when your coworker says, I noticed the one guy's over here like, oh, I can now put my arm around my coworker over here. We're a couple now. It means that if you're going to achieve some degree of harmony, you probably want to invest as much into the relationship with your team as you do with your spouse, which, granted, for some couples is not much time at all. But generally, the happier ones at least work a little bit on this. Speaking of which, back in 1992, well, okay, hang on, now I need to do this. How many people in this room were alive in 1992? Okay, good. You don't understand. I teach at the university level at Washington, and as I was going through and thinking about this, I'm realizing, holy crap, that was 30 years ago. Most of my college students would not be alive, so I just wanted to kind of double check to make sure. There was a book that came out, some of you may remember, called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And this was a book that was designed to try to explain some of the gender-inherent differences between a traditional male-female couple. And it absolutely soared to the top of all the charts, all the book charts. It became a very, very popular thing. Everybody got very, very excited about it because it promised, harmonies for forever, ever since. In the book, the author likes men and women as being from different planets, Mars and Venus. And he claims that Martians and Venusians have diametrically different communication styles, emotional needs, and personal values from each other. Now, last poll of the day, I promise. How many of you are married? How many of you would agree that your spouse just doesn't have a fucking clue? Oh shit, my wife's in the audience. I need to put my hand down. Yeah, it's not uncommon to feel like your spouse, your significant other, comes from a completely different planet. And in some respects, there are some truths to this. There is definitely some societal and some interesting historical and other sorts of precedent that lead us to realize that, Predominantly men and women, stereotypically speaking, we think a little bit differently from one another. Not that one is right or one is wrong, but just different. And that if in fact we are going to be able to succeed in our relationships, if we're going to be happy in our relationships, it makes sense for us to take a step back and look at how the other side thinks in order to be able to better meet them halfway. Does this sound familiar to anybody in the workplace? Developers and managers frequently think a little differently. Now, before I go deeper into this talk, I want to establish a couple of ground rules. First of all, what I'm speaking to are gross stereotypes. There are always going to be ways in which an individual developer does not fit the stereotype, or in which an individual manager does things a little bit differently from the stereotype. But stereotypes exist for a reason. In many cases, they are an amalgamation of behavior that we see happening in the majority across a large cross-section of folks. Developers often do this. Managers often do that. It's not to mean there aren't exceptions. You might be the exception. You probably think you're the exception. I won't judge you one way or the other for thinking that. But remember that there are still things we can learn from the stereotypes, even if the exact details don't always hold. Secondly, I was not thinking of anybody in particular when I wrote these slides. I did not have like my former boss or my former team or any of those individuals. As a matter of fact, the only person I was probably thinking about when I wrote these slides was my wife, and dear God, I hope she never sees them, which is really frustrating because she's sitting in the back of this room today. So we'll see whether I survive this or not. The last thing is, I'm really not trying to offend anybody, or as a buddy of mine once put it, he said, that's actually not true, Ted. When you get on stage, your goal is to offend everybody equally. So if you're a manager and you're feeling a little picked on, that's okay, you deserve it. And if you're a developer and you're listening to me make a joke and you're saying, that's not funny, it's okay, everybody else is laughing. They're not laughing at you. Well, they are laughing at you, but they don't know that they're laughing at you because you're a developer. They're laughing at developers as a whole. Now, the fact that this room is like 90% developers means I probably want to make more jokes about managers than I do developers, but we'll see how it goes. Eh? You have been warned. I grew up as a developer. As a matter of fact, I have a very vivid memory. 1995, I am sitting in my boss's office, a gentleman by the name of Mike Cohn, who later went on to become very popular in the Agile space, Mountain Goat Software. He invented planning poker, as a matter of fact. And I remember Mike telling me about his journey where he started out as a developer and then he eventually became management. He was director of development, then later became vice president of development. And I remember looking at this man, this incredibly smart man, and thinking, what an idiot. There's no way I will ever reach a point in my life where I don't write code. Writing code is so much fun. It's cathartic. I can shape things. I can make things happen that never happened before. Why would I ever give this up? Anybody else feel that way? Never going to give up code. Ever. Yeah. I'm a manager now. Yeah. Because it turns out that as you get a little bit older and as you've seen a few things, you've been around the block a few times, you begin to realize that in many cases, writing code is fun, but there are other challenges in the world. There are other things that are worth chasing, that are worth exploring and experimenting with and so forth. And so it's important to acknowledge that, yeah, there are no heroes and there are no villains in this talk. As much as it may seem like, as much as it will feel like, it will be really easy to pick on the managers. Because developers never do anything wrong, right? I mean, there's 90% developers in this room. You had better be nodding as I say that. Otherwise, the mob could potentially, you're a manager? What is the fundamental problem? Imagine, if you will, close your eyes if you must, you're a part of a team. And this team, thus far, has been very successful. The project, surprisingly, was on schedule. They weren't behind. Matter of fact, they may have been even a week ahead, depending upon when exactly you took the pulse of the team on any given day. They were using a leading edge language. It's not like they were using yesterday's legacy software. They were mentoring other developers in the company, and they were very excited about that. They were signed up for an advanced training class to help them learn how to use that leading edge language even more effectively. They were looking at their development processes, and they were stripping out some of the things that didn't really apply to them and adding a few steps that in fact were necessary because what they were doing was a little bit different from the rest of the company. The developers were motivated. As a matter of fact, the project lead notes that it is not uncommon to see developers voluntarily sticking around for a couple hours every day to make sure that things were working, that make sure that in fact, the milestones were being hit, or because a coworker, a friend was stuck, they would stick around and pair with that individual to make sure that things were working. This project was really humming along quite successfully. So the team lead then got together with her lead, basically her boss, and this was like a monthly or bi-monthly one-on-one. And the boss said, hey, I am so excited that this team is doing so well. We feel that it is absolutely reasonable for us to advance the deadline by 3 months. Since we know that you're already capable of hitting all of those deadlines, we know that there is a little bit of fluff in the schedule. We can strip that out, and we can get this to deliver 3 months early, and how cool would that be? And the team lead said, and the boss said, I noticed that you're using that leading edge language. That's great because that means you're going to be able to do more stuff, right? I looked at some of the materials on the internet, and one thing they keep saying is this language encourages reusability, modularity, all of these other good things, which I know will help you be faster. So that's great. Keep doing that. And the team lead said, oh, and by the way, the manager said, we're actually, in order to, we don't want to just advance the schedule by 3 months and not give you that additional time. We notice that you're spending time mentoring a bunch of other developers. Yeah, if we cut that out alone, you'll get the 3 months back that you need in order to hit this revised deadline. And the team lead said, and the manager cut them off and said, oh, in that training class that you signed up for, that training class, you don't need it. You're clearly already where you need to be in terms of using this language, using this tool. You don't need to know anything more to be more effective. By the way, how many of you in this room want to take a shower right now? Because this is just making you feel gross all over listening to this story. Management said, oh, you don't need to revise your process. We have a corporate standard. Just follow that. And all of these things will help you get all of your time that you need to hit that 3 month earlier schedule. And not surprising, the developers stopped staying late. How many of you would be excited to be on this team at this point? Yeah, no hands in the air. I wouldn't have either. What did they miss? I mean, how did management miss this so badly? How do you screw this up this badly? It's almost like you were trying to crush the life out of this team. How could you miss this that badly? This is the horror story that developers often feel. This is the horror story that developers, like when we sit around campfires at night, right? Little monitor of a campfire, and we're sitting around in a cubicle sharing ghost stories, right? Sharing Diet Coke and pizza or s'more candy bars or something. These are the kinds of things that we tell each other to spook each other, to scare us. What do developers do? What do we do fundamentally? If you ask anybody on the street, if we were to walk out this door, find random people walking down the street and say, what do software developers do? Their answer would probably be something around code. They do code. They don't know what code is, but they know that we do it. We do code. And what does code do? Well, I mean, code does software. And what does software do? Screws up the world. Right? I mean, isn't it great to be sitting on an airplane that has those little seat-back entertainment systems that allow you to watch any movie in existence if only the thing would actually not have to be rebooted every half an hour? Right? I don't think I've taken an airplane trip in the last X number of years where they haven't had to reboot the in-flight entertainment system at least once. How many of you used a software system to book your travel here? Orbitz or Expedia or any of the other online systems, and it all worked perfectly. Right? Or hotel booking systems. Yeah, there's a couple of hands that are like, it worked great for me. That just means it's coming to haunt you. Software karma's a bitch, man. You stood up for the code is going to screw you over because the gods of computer science are an evil and capricious lot. And if you stand up for them, they will crucify you. So you're doomed. Nobody travel with that guy. He's going to end up in Antarctica at the rate things are going. Because we are all software developers, we know how frequently code screws up. There are stories. There are some amazing stories of how code screws up on a regular basis. Approximately, I don't remember, 10 or 12 years ago, maybe you guys heard the story about the United States Navy cruiser that was stopped dead in the middle of the water. Yeah, the USS Yorktown, as I recall, a U.S. Navy Aegis cruiser, they were on doing maneuvers, patrol, whatever. I think it was in the Mediterranean, I'm not positive. And all of a sudden, one of the sailors on the ship entered a zero in for a particular field, like how much fuel was in a particular tank. He accidentally put in a zero. The system crashed. The whole ship crashed. And it was literally standing at a standstill. I mean, I'm so glad that we have this multi-billion-dollar cruiser in the middle of the Mediterranean doing nothing. True story. Or the Ariane 5 rocket, when it launched and exploded, taking its multi-billion-dollar payload with it. Why? Because there was a portion of the code that wasn't protected against floating point division errors. Right? What we do as developers is we bring code to life, and what does code do? Makes life difficult. Don't you feel proud of yourself right now? This is so awesome. What do we really do? What are we trying to do? It's maybe the better question to ask. Is your job to write code? No. It's really not. It may feel like it at times, and it may feel like this is what the whole reason that we get paid what we do. But realistically, the goal of a developer is to solve problems. Problems which have never been solved before. Because if they've been solved before, well, then we could probably buy something off the shelf and just use that. Your job is to create something bespoke that has never existed. And we frequently, most often, use code to do that. But your job is to create something where nothing has existed before now. And in many cases, the problems that you are solving are not your problems. Have you ever wondered why there are so many software developer tools available in the open source world? How many different build tools do we actually need? I mean, we had Make, and then we had Ant, and then we had Maven, and then we had Gradle, and then we had Ivy. We had all these other Java tools, SBT, for example. And that's just in the Java space. Let's talk about what's available in the .NET space. Let's talk about what's available in the Node.js space. Let's talk about what's available in the Eiffel space or the Haskell space it seems like every time a developer is bored, they build a build tool. It's like, I'm on vacation in Greece. What should I do? I'll build a build tool. Because that's what the Greeks did. They built things, so it makes sense. Why? How many people in this room would actively start an open source project to do accounting? No? CRM. Yes, everybody wants to build their own open source CRM, right? Slide system? One hand down here. Thank you for bailing me out. It's another speaker, isn't it? Yeah, it's another speaker. Yeah. Which proves the point. We like to write code to solve our problems, but what are we paid to do? Writing code to solve other people's problems. And we do that by telling computers what to do. We write code. We create scripts. We build software. We build enterprise systems. We build objects. We build functions. We build services. We build all these different things. We create places where data can be stored, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, what we do is we solve other people's problems by writing code to try and solve their problems. And sometimes we're good about it, and sometimes we're not, and we can spend a whole lot of time debating about where and why and how we miss the mark on that. But that is the fundamental thing, that we create solutions to other people's problems, which means that software development is fundamentally an act of creation. You share more in common with artists and musicians and crafters than you do with engineers. The fact that we refer to ourselves as software engineers is actually an interesting conundrum. And by the way, the rest of the engineering community hates us for that, because they have to study in college. They have to take all of these exams. They have to pass certification to make sure that when they build a building, it doesn't actually collapse on top of us, because they have real life threatening scenarios that they have to deal with. And us, you fire up your web browser and you watch one of these, these YouTube talks on Groovy from this DevOps organization, and boom, you're a software engineer. You could literally put that on your LinkedIn, software engineer. Accreditation, YouTube. How many years? 1. You get to do that. We don't have a professionalism society that establishes particular rules and so forth. Anybody can become a software engineer. This is awesome. The thing of it is, though, in order for you to write code, you have to be able to sit down and write. And in many cases, what that means is you have to have time to yourself to write. Now, we can talk all day long about software pairing and so forth, and that's a very useful thing. But frankly, that's a case where you're alone together, as strange as that may seem. The point is, you have to be given opportunities to actually put hands to keyboard, whether it's just one of you or two of you or a whole mob of you. You have to have time to create. You have to have this opportunity to create the thing that people are paying you to create. What is the number one complaint of every software engineer at any company on the planet? Meetings. Too many meetings. If I could do one thing, says the developer, I would wipe out all the meetings at this company, because it inhibits your ability to write code. Because what you want to do is you want to get into what psychologists refer to as a flow state. The flow state, the positive mental state of being completely absorbed, focused, and involved in your activities at a certain point in time, as well as deriving enjoyment from being engaged in that activity. How many of the developers in this room have gotten into a state where everything's just working? You see where it's going. Yeah, the people are like, oh yeah. And it's like a religious experience when it happens, isn't it? Time just slides by. You'd have no idea how much time has passed. It could you missed lunch, you missed your afternoon, get together with some of the other folks. You're working late into the evening because you're in this state, and it's euphoric. It is literally drugs for software developers. But it's not just us, by the way. Lots of creational industries, lots of creatives will talk about getting into this state, whether you are writing code, whether you are writing prose, whether you are artistry, whether you're drawing a picture or painting a picture or creating a symphony or playing music, getting into this flow state, my mind isn't wandering. I'm not thinking of something else. I'm totally involved in what I'm doing. My body feels good. I don't seem to hear anything. The world seems to be cut off. I am less aware of myself and my problems. Does this sound familiar? Completely involved in activity for its own sake. The ego falls away. Time flies. Every action, movement, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one, like playing jazz. Any jazz players in here? One. Okay, so that reference was for you. It's such an amazing feeling. And then your boss comes by and says, hey, you're going to make that meeting today? And you're like, what? What are you? Yeah, we've got that meeting at 3 o'clock. You're like, it's noon. Yeah, but you're going to come to the meeting, right? Yeah. Great. Awesome. See you there. And the spell is broken. You look back at your monitor and you can almost see in the distance, right? Like the gray havens, right, from Lord of the Rings. You can see that euphoria just sliding further and further and further away. And you know that you're not going to be able to get it back. And you look at your boss, you look at that manager as he's walking down the aisle, popping into everybody else's cube to make sure that they're going to make the 3 o'clock meeting. And murder seems too good for that guy. Because we crave that feeling. We crave that flow state. We want it. We need it. It's when we do our best work. Why in the hell would you take me out of that state, boss? What we frequently want as developers is to be given a clear direction. Tell me what you need me to do. Tell me what hill you need me to take. Tell me what class you need me to write. Tell me what problem you need me to solve. And get out of my way. Just get out of my way. Let me go do the thing that you pay me to do. Yes, obviously, I would love for any obstacles that show up to be handled, but don't be one of those obstacles. Tell me what you need done. Get out of my way. It helps, by the way, if I know how this fits into the larger picture. Because if I know that my component is going to be talking to Heinz's component, and then I start to reach a point where we need to have some kind of agreement, I can go over and talk to him. And I'm kind of sort of still in a flow state when we do this because we're still creating. We're creating together now. So we might sit down together at the keyboard and we might work together to figure out how this works. And then he goes off to finish up what he's doing and I go off to finish up what I'm doing. I want to know how what I'm doing relates to the rest of the world, but I want to be able to do it. And I want to be able to feel like if I have a problem, I can turn to Heinz or Stefan or whoever else is on my team and say, I'm stuck. And have them say, oh, okay, cool, let's sit down together. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. I want to have that sense of safety with my team so that if I say I'm stuck, I don't feel like somehow this is going to haunt me on a performance review later. But most of all, as a developer, I want to get better at what I do. Let me go to conferences. Let me figure out ways to do things. Let me experiment. Let me explore. Let me get better at what I do because, hey, fundamental truth about most human beings, we all want to be better at the things that we want to do. All of us crave this degree of competency. Help me grow, boss. In other words, what developers are really seeking, as most human beings are really seeking, is they're seeking ARC. Autonomy, relatability, and competence. Tell me what you need me to do, leave me to do it. Tell me how this relates to the rest of the world so that I can understand where my part fits and how my part fits, and I can derive a certain amount of enjoyment in knowing that I'm making the world better because this is how it relates to the rest of the world. And give me the tools I need by which I can do my job more effectively. Give me these three things, says the developer, and I will do all kinds of amazing things for you. Now, one of the things you will often hear when you start talking to people about the whole management-developer relationship thing is you will often hear about the idea of being driven. We want to make sure that our developers are driven. We want to make sure that they have drive. There was, in fact, a book that came out a number of years ago that was titled exactly that, Drive, talking about the psychology of motivation. And this actually teases off of what's known as drive theory, the idea that there are psychological drives that are driving each of us. That when you are hungry, there is a drive to eat. And when you are thirsty, there is a drive to sleep. Drive to drink. And when you are tired, there is a drive to sleep, and so forth. These are all fundamental psychological things that act upon you. And so if we tap into that drive, that in fact, if you want to do any of these things, we tap into your drive, we tap into your need to be paid. We tap into your need to go on vacation. We reward you with these things. We offer you opportunities to satisfy those drives, and you will respond. Drive theory. The interesting thing about drive theory is we always talk about people being driven. Just go up on LinkedIn and you'll see all kinds of resumes. I am a driven individual, passionate about the things that I do. Who's driving? Seriously. If you are being driven, what's driving you? It's actually a misnomer. People who experience autonomy, relatedness, and competence, they don't need drive. Because drive is kind of a binary thing. If you are hungry and you eat, you no longer have the drive to eat. And if you're thirsty and you drink, you no longer have the drive to satisfy your thirst condition. Driven is a very primitive thing. But the things that we deal with, the kinds of environments that we work in, that kind of primitive thinking doesn't really work. If you have the autonomy, relatedness, and competence, you don't need to be driven. You actually want to be there because this is satisfying your emotional needs at a much more fundamental level than just these simple if A, then B sorts of psychological drive theory approaches. Most of the time, if you are dissatisfied at work, if you don't care for where you work, it's because one or more of those three things are not being provided to you. You either don't have the autonomy that you believe you deserve, you don't know how what you're doing relates to the rest of the world, or you don't feel that you are being given the tools to be successful in the job that they have asked of you to do. So for the managers in the room, what do managers do? Does anybody actually want to try to answer this question? It's actually a really interesting question if you're a manager, this is a reasonable question to ask the people that report to you. What do you think I do all day? I have asked this question of people that reported to me in the past, and one of them just said, frankly, I don't know. I think you show up, you answer a few emails, and then, I don't know, maybe go talk to the CEO? Yeah. It's amazing how often people who aren't managers really don't understand what managers actually do. And that's kind of fair because in many cases, a lot of the things that managers do are very, very ephemeral. It's kind of hard to put a finger on it. It's kind of like software architecture. What is it architects do? Something, PowerPoint, something. Because architects will frequently be responsible for a technical vision for a particular system, and the way to express that is often done using PowerPoint. So we kind of conclude that if you're a software architect, you're really good at PowerPoint. Because that's all we ever see of you, are these PowerPoint decks that you, the architect, created. Managers, same way. What is it managers do? Something, meetings, something. Now, what should they be doing? Well, truthfully, if you really wanted to sum it up into a single sentence, set vision, create goals, and then hold people accountable. That's where we want to go, people. That's what we want to do. That's what we want to accomplish. And here are the steps we will take to accomplish that, which means here are the things that I need the people in this room to do to get there. Let's go. And by the way, if we don't hit it, we're going to have conversation, because that's the accountability part of this discussion. And for a lot of people, that's where the conversation stops. Yeah, that's what managers do. They basically point, and then they sit in the back of the cart, and they like whip the horses and, steer the horses, and they're basically a weight on the team as they come through and make sure that the team is continuing to hit that. Yeah, that's what a bad manager does. The good managers are the ones who are actually out in front of the team. There was a group that I was leading at a company called Smartsheet in town. We had actually hired about 7 boot camp coding school graduates, people who were less than a year in the industry, many of whom who had just graduated from one of these 9-month coding schools. They did not go to a university for formal training, and many of them, this was their second career, et cetera, et cetera. And with that team, it was very clear to both myself and the team lead that they were going to need to do a lot of pairing. They were going to need to do a lot of self-support. And at that particular time, the company was going through a certain amount of growth, certain amount of physical reorganization. And I realized that what was going to happen if I wasn't careful is my team was going to get scattered all over a very, very large building floor. And that was going to be inherently difficult for my team, because that meant that it was going to be a 5-minute trek to go over here and talk to their team lead, or a 10-minute trek to go over here and talk to one of their teammates. And I really needed this team to be a team. So even before we had finished the paperwork on the last person to join the team, I was already downstairs bribing the facilities people. And I'm not kidding, I was bribing them. I bought a nice bottle of scotch and brought it to the guy's desk and said, here, don't tell anybody where you got this. Can I please have my team all sitting next to each other? And he's like, well, the bottle really wasn't necessary, but sure, yeah, we'll make that happen. Did my team ever know that I did that? Nope. I don't think any of them ever realized how much it cost me to make sure they all sat together. But it paid off in spades, because 4 months later, they delivered an application that was a part of the CEO's keynote at the user conference that year. 4 months, they delivered a project. They were all less than a year experience, and they did it by pulling together as a team. I never wrote one line of code for it. Now, making them sit together, did that cause that? I don't know. I really don't know. But I knew that was going to be an obstacle if I let it remain. And it's my job as the manager to clear out the obstacles ahead of the cart so that they don't have to deal with it. Because trying to deal with it 6 months to a year later, by that point, everybody's kind of set. All the tables are set, all the chairs are in the right place, everybody's kind of like put up their little tchotchkes, et cetera. The time to do that move was at the time we were still reshuffling everything. As a manager, your job is to peer down the road. Look to see what obstacles your team will face and sweep those out of the way. Your job is to make sure that the team can function as a team. Make sure that the team feels comfortable with each other. That's psychological safety that I mentioned earlier. Your job is to make sure that nobody feels out of place. Nobody feels uncomfortable raising an uncomfortable issue. Your job is to give them room to grow as individuals, to let them define some of their own ceremonies. This same team, I insisted very vigorously at the start of the team's formation that we were going to be doing weekly book club meetings. I bought a copy of a book for everybody on the team, and every Friday we went off to a pizza place in the building next door, and we sat there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, going over a couple of chapters in the book. And after about 3 months of that, the team came to me and said, you know what? We'd like to actually shut that down because we think that we need the time in order to be able to hit the deadlines that the CEO specified for this project. I said, are you sure you want to do this? They said, yep, we talked about it, and every one of us really feels like we want to hit this deadline. Okay. because that told me more than anything else that the team was thinking like a team now, not just as a series of individuals. Your job as a manager, even above all of these other things, this last line, find and nurture, shield talent. Find good people, get the hell out of their way, but protect them from everything else that might be going on around them. Now, part of what you can do is you want to be able to set that vision. You want the team to know where they're going. That's part of that relatedness notion. So you often hear talk about vision and mission and strategy. Vision is sort of the big picture idea. This is often what the CEO will talk about. Mission, this is a general statement of how we want to achieve that. Right? We want to build this kind of thing that does these things in these particular ways. And the strategy, well, this is generally how we're going to accomplish this. Now, these terms can be somewhat interchangeable. You don't always need all three of them. But at the end of the day, you want to have a pretty clear picture as to where the team is headed. This is the direction we're going. These are the things we're trying to accomplish. There will be obstacles in the way, and your job is to clear those obstacles out of the way. Some cases, the obstacles will be people on the team. There will be people on this team that, frankly, don't really fit in. They don't belong. One of the people on that team that I just mentioned, he took off to South Korea for 6 weeks because his sister was getting married or something like that. I never quite got the full story, and I didn't realize weddings took 6 weeks. But what was interesting is the team, through the team lead, came to me and said, you know what, we're actually okay with him being gone. We actually kind of don't want him to come back. Oh, really? Tell me more about he didn't fit in. Much of the stuff he was doing was not high quality. Much of the stuff that he was doing had to be redone by other people on the team. He was a net negative contributor to the team. And so it's my job as the manager to deal with that, either by holding that person accountable and getting them to elevate their game, or getting them off the team, either moving into a different team somewhere or separating them from the company. That is like the not fun part of management, but it's a necessary part. How is your team perceived? What do other people in the company know about your team? What do they expect of your team? Part of your job as a manager is to manage up and out. How does your team get some of the projects that it's going to work on? Where is the direction of the software that your team is involved with going next? What are the sorts of second and third phase things that you're going to work on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? These are all important components to make sure that your team works better. And the team as itself, by the way, you don't need A-list all-stars. There's this temptation when you're hiring to say, I'm only going to hire the best. I only want the top 10% of software developers anywhere in the world. That's not actually what's going to create an effective team. It actually helps for the team to be diverse. It helps for the team, not just diverse in terms of DEI initiatives and so forth, but diverse in their skill set, diverse in their perspective. It helps for the team to actually bring a variety of different perspectives, but more importantly, to fill more of that bell curve type of skill distribution. You want to have some juniors who can get better, and you want to have some seniors who can mentor and get better, and in some cases promote out of your team. How are they growing? And more importantly, if you're a manager, who is your designated successor? If you, the leader of this group, the leader of this organization, if you were to actually disappear for a week or 2 weeks or 6 weeks, who sits in your chair while you're gone? Who is responsible for carrying out some of the things that you need to do? Who's going to represent your team during those meetings? If the answer is, well, nobody can do that, you have a problem. Because if something happens to you, your team is screwed. Your job, your first job as a manager of a team is to find your designated successor. They don't have to be ready for the job now. If they are, you should immediately look to see them get promoted out of your team. But find your designated successor and groom them, train them, teach them, give them opportunities to sit in your chair so that when the time comes, you can step away, they will sit there, and they will run the team as well as you ever did. It doesn't always feel safe to do that, because then people will say, well, then what do I need you for? Well, I mean, technically you don't. You can promote me any day of the week. I'm totally okay with that. But the successor will frequently reach a point where it's like, yeah, you really should be promoted, and I'm not leaving, so let's work to get you a job on a different team or potentially a different company. Grow your coaching tree. They talk about this in sport. When a coach has assistant coaches that go off and become head coaches within the league, they call that a coaching tree. And it's considered a significant sign of influence and respect and success when a single coach can transform the league by virtue of the fact that 6 teams were coached by people that were his assistants at one point or another. Your job is to figure out how to take your people and make them better, but in many cases to also scan around you and above you to figure out where your team is headed as a whole. This is what it really means to find, nurture, and grow the talent. And by the way, managers, when we talk about motivation, managers will often talk about how hard it is to motivate people. How do I motivate people? Images of that manager with the whip driving the cart come to mind. Here is an important tip for you. You don't motivate people. People are already motivated. Your job is to tap into that motivation. Why are they here at this job? They're here for a reason. Why are they here? Why do they want to work on this team? Why do they want to work in software as a whole? Why do they want to work for this company? Tap into some of that, reward it, encourage it, and you will find that people will respond to you much more effectively. So where does all of this leave us? Well, first of all, managers, developers, you're different. Managers are literally about meetings, personal connections, trying to connect this team with other parts of the company, trying to connect the team members with themselves, trying to connect the team members with other parts of the company because you want to try to grow them, etc. Managers are all about relationships. They're all about people. Developers are all about flow. Those are two very, very different things. And so accept that there's going to be a certain amount of contention. There's going to be a certain amount of, I do need to meet with you at some point. When's a good time to do it? When's the best way to not break your flow state? Developers are not laborers. We're not here doing the same thing over and over and over again. A lot of the traditional management methods that specifically talk about metrics, they are often rooted in what's called the scientific method of management. And it's all about people doing the same thing over and over and over again. We're not. We're creatives. It's like asking Michelangelo to paint on a schedule. It's not how that works. Getting into that flow state is not something you can do at the drop of a hat. As a developer, though, you have to acknowledge that managers and that relationship are important. They're important to you. It's critical that you be able to let your manager know how things are going so that your manager can do their thing. You will need to talk to people about schedule. You will need to have deadlines. You will need to have these things because nobody else knows what's going on your laptop besides you unless you tell them. You will need to have those meetings. Maybe not as many, but you will need to have them. Lastly, this is a huge subject. This is a huge subject. Whole forests have been sacrificed to the subject of management of developers as well as other industries. There's no way I can make you a manager, make you an effective manager in a 50-minute or 60-minute or 75-minute or 5-day lecture. But what I can do is I can leave you with those tidbits. ARC, okay? Remember ARC. Keep that acronym in mind. As a manager, your job is to find, grow, sustain talent, And developers need flow. Give them the time to achieve that flow, and they'll love you. And bye.
Ted, thank you.